The owner's manual for one of the best-selling vehicles in America recommends an oil that, according to fleet data I've been reviewing, may be quietly accelerating engine wear in specific driving conditions. And the data suggests Toyota's engineers understood exactly which conditions those are when they printed that recommendation. That's not speculation. That's what comes out when you stop looking at 3-car YouTube comparisons and start looking at wear patterns across 2 million engines over time. So let's get into it. When you're analyzing engine wear data across 2 million vehicles, not a controlled test with a handful of cars, but actual long-term data from commercial fleets, rental agencies, taxi operators, and high-mileage private owners, patterns emerge that short-term testing physically cannot capture. You need time, you need volume, you need engines that have lived real lives in real conditions, not engines babied through a 6-month YouTube experiment. That's the data set that matters. And when you look at it, honestly, some of what Toyota prints in that manual starts to look less like engineering guidance and more like a compromise between competing interests. Here's what I mean. Toyota's recommendation of 0W20 full synthetic isn't arbitrary. There's a specific, logical reason that grade is in that manual, and to their credit, it's not a lie. Cold start protection with a 0W base is genuinely excellent. The oil flows almost immediately at startup, which is when a significant percentage of total engine wear actually occurs. On a cold January morning, 0W20 reaches critical bearing surfaces faster than a thicker oil would. That part of the recommendation is sound engineering. But here's where it gets complicated. Fuel economy standards in the United States put enormous pressure on manufacturers to squeeze every tenth of a mile per gallon they can out of their fleet average. Thinner oil reduces internal friction. Reduced friction improves fuel economy numbers. Better fuel economy numbers help Toyota meet CAFE standards, corporate average fuel economy, which carry real financial penalties if they're not met. So when Toyota recommends 0W20, they're not just thinking about your engine. They're thinking about regulatory compliance, emissions testing cycles, and the EPA window sticker on the showroom floor. None of that is scandalous on its own. That's how the industry works. But it becomes relevant when you realize the manual gives you one recommendation, regardless of whether you're driving 5 miles a day in Phoenix in August or doing highway miles in Minnesota in February. One grade, one interval. For every driver, every climate, every use case. And that's the thing the manual doesn't tell you. Here's what the manual doesn't segment. And this is the part that matters to you specifically. The recommendation assumes something about your driving pattern that may not be true. It assumes a mix of city and highway driving, moderate ambient temperatures, and a relatively new engine operating within normal tolerances. That's the average. That's who the manual is written for. Not you specifically, but a statistical average of every Toyota owner across the entire country. If you live somewhere that regularly sees temperatures above 95 degrees Fahrenheit, you're not the average. If you take frequent short trips, where the engine never fully reaches operating temperature, you're not the average. If you're towing, if you have over 150,000 miles on the clock, if you bought the car used and don't know its full service history, you're not the average. And the manual doesn't acknowledge any of that. What happens when 0W20 runs in conditions it wasn't optimized for? That's where we have to talk about viscosity. Kinematic viscosity is just a measurement of how well an oil resists flow under heat. Think of it as the difference between water and maple syrup protecting two metal surfaces moving against each other at high speed. At room temperature, 0W20 and 5W30 feel similar. But at operating temperature, and we're talking about oil temperatures that can reach 220, 230, even 250 degrees Fahrenheit under sustained load, those two oils behave very differently. The 20 and the 30 in those grades refer to the oil's viscosity at high temperature. A 20-weight oil at operating temperature is meaningfully thinner than a 30-weight oil at the same temperature. Thinner oil creates a thinner film between moving metal parts. In a brand new engine with tight tolerances, that film is usually sufficient, but as an engine accumulates miles, internal clearances widen slightly, bearings wear, cylinder walls develop microscopic scoring, and a thinner oil film that was adequate at 10,000 miles may not provide the same protection at 120,000 miles. This is where fleet data becomes revealing, because you can measure it. You can pull an oil sample at drain intervals and send it to a lab. And what comes back in that analysis, the parts per million of iron, aluminum, copper, and chromium, tells you exactly how much engine materia L is ending up in the oil. When Blackstone Laboratories published their aggregated used oil analysis data, one number stood out to anyone paying close attention, and very few people in the mainstream automotive space talked about it. Blackstone is one of the largest independent oil analysis laboratories in the country. They've processed hundreds of thousands of used oil samples over decades. Their universal average for wear metals gives you a benchmark, what normal wear looks like across the general vehicle population. And when you compare Toyota four cylinders running factory spec 0W20 against the same engines running 5W30 in identical mileage ranges, where metal concentrations in the 0W20 samples trend higher in a specific subset of vehicles. Not all of them. That's important. The difference is most pronounced in three categories. Engines with over 100,000 miles, vehicles, operating in sustained high-temperature environments and turbocharged applications. Now look at what Toyota's own service documents say. TSB 094R07, a technical service bulletin that wasn't exactly front-page news when it was issued, addressed oil consumption concerns in certain four-cylinder engines. The bulletin acknowledged that some engines were consuming oil at rates higher than expected and outlined an inspection procedure. What it didn't do was revisit the viscosity recommendation. The grade stayed the same, the interval stayed the same, but the acknowledgement that these engines were consuming oil faster than the design intended is sitting right there in the document. Think about what oil consumption at elevated rates actually means mechanically. It means the oil film is breaking down faster than it should. It means you may be running lower than optimal oil level between changes without knowing it. And it means the oil that is in there is working harder, oxidizing faster, and providing less protection toward the end of its service interval than it did at the beginning. If you could pull one of those high-consumption engines apart and look at the piston rings, here's what you'd often find. Carbon deposits. Not catastrophic failure, not seized metal, but a gradual accumulation of combustion byproducts on the ringlands that slowly reduces the ring's ability to seal properly. That process accelerates with thinner oil under heat stress. It's not dramatic, it's slow. And by the time you notice it, tens of thousands of miles of marginal lubrication have already happened. 5 turbo, or anything running Toyota's Dynamic Force engine family. What I just described changes the conversation entirely. Turbochargers operate at extreme temperatures. The turbine housing on a modern turbo can reach 16600 to 800 degrees Fahrenheit under boost. The oil that lubricates the turbo bearing, and this is the same oil circulating through your entire engine, gets exposed to that heat. When you shut the engine off after hard driving, coolant flow stops, but the turbo keeps spinning and stays hot. That heat soaks back into the oil in the bearing housing. Over time, this causes the oil to coke, to carbonize and harden into a varnish-like deposit inside the turbo bearing. Now here's the thing about LSPI. Low-speed pre-ignition. It's a phenomenon that affects turbocharged direct injection engines specifically. Under certain low-speed, high-load conditions, think merging onto a highway, accelerating from a stop, a droplet of oil or fuel in the combustion chamber can ignite before the spark plug fires. The result is an uncontrolled detonation event. A single LSPI event can generate cylinder pressure spikes 3 to 4 times higher than normal combustion. We're talking about forces that can crack pistons, bend connecting rods, and destroy bearings in a single event. LSPI frequency has been shown in SAE research papers to correlate with oil formulation. Specifically, certain additive packages in conventional and some synthetic oils have been shown to increase LSPI risk. This is why Toyota introduced their GF6 specification requirement. Oils certified to that standard have been tested for LSPI suppression. If you're running a turbocharged Toyota and you're not running a GF6 certified oil, you're leaving a meaningful protection gap on the table, regardless of what viscosity you choose. Now, pull up the owner's manual for the same Toyota 4-cylinder engine sold in Germany. The European specification for several Toyota models lists 0W30 as an acceptable alternative grade. Sometimes as the preferred grade for sustained high-speed driving, which in Germany means Autobahn use. The same engine, different manual, different recommendation. Why? Because European test cycles and driving patterns are different. Because the engineers who wrote those specifications understood that a blanket grade doesn't serve every driver equally. The American manual doesn't mention this. It doesn't say if you regularly drive at sustained highway speeds above 80 miles per hour, consider a higher viscosity. It says 0W20, full stop. That's not a conspiracy. That's a document written to serve the median use case in its target market. But it does prove that the manual is not a universal engineering truth. It's a regional approximation. And knowing that gives you permission to make a more informed decision for your specific situation. So here's how to actually use this information, because the answer is genuinely not the same for every Toyota owner watching this. If you have a naturally aspirated Toyota engine, a 4-cylinder Corolla, Camry, or similar, under 100,000 miles, doing a mix of city and highway driving in a moderate climate, the factory 0W20 recommendation is reasonable. The engineering case for it is sound in those conditions. Don't change it based on fear. Do make sure you're using a GF6 certified full synthetic and that you're not stretching intervals beyond 5,000 to 6,000 miles if you're doing a lot of short trips. If you're over 100,000 miles on the same naturally aspirated engine, particularly if you're in a hot climate or doing a lot of stop-and-go driving, consider moving to 0W30 or 5W30 at your next change. Run an oil analysis at your next drain. Blackstone charges around $30 and gives you a full wear metals report. That report will tell you more about what's actually happening inside your engine than any YouTube video ever could. If you're running a turbocharged Toyota of any generation, use a GF6A certified full synthetic. Respect a 5,000 mile interval maximum. And if you're doing track days, towing, or living somewhere that regularly hits summer temperatures above 95 degrees, talk to a shop about whether 0W30 makes sense for your specific application. Here's the physical thing I want you to do this week. Pull your dipstick. Look at the oil on it. If it's dark brown trending toward black, and your next change is more than 100 miles away, you're running oxidized oil. It's still lubricating, but it's not protecting the way fresh oil does. If it smells burnt or has a gritty texture when you rub it between your fingers, you've already pushed that oil past its useful life. And check your oil level while you're there. If you're down half a quart or more between changes, your engine is consuming oil. That's not automatically a crisis, but it is information. It means your engine needs more attention to interval, not less. The manual gives you a starting point. What you just learned gives you the context to know when the starting point isn't enough. Drop a comment and tell me what engine you're running, your mileage, and what oil you're currently using. I genuinely want to see what's out there on real Toyotas driven by real people. And if this made you look at that manual a little differently, share it with someone else who owns one of these. Subscribe if you want to see the follow-up where I get into what used oil analysis actually looks like on high mileage engines, the results on a few of those,